We're talking about Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone.
The long-anticipated Harry Potter movie has finally arrived.
Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone.
It doesn't really get too much bigger.
How well has Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone aged 23 years after it was first released? Has it held up well against the test of time in terms of overall production, structure, cultural impact, and, most importantly, the visual CGI of the time? Is there anything better that can be done to improve this movie after so many years, or should it be left alone and not be subjected to an Indiana Jones, Spielberg, Lucas style touch-up? Let's take a look at the Philosopher's Stone 23 years on. Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone is the movie that launched the Potter franchise into the stratosphere. As if the books alone weren't already big enough, the release of this film created Potter mania and is absolutely, positively pivotal in what would be the crucial layout for the entire 8-movie series. It's so important for one reason. Well, many reasons that I'll highlight, but the most important reason is that it turned the reader's imagination into reality and inspired thousands of people who had not read the books to go to that bookstore and pick up their very first copy. It made superstars out of Daniel Radcliffe, Emma Watson, and Rupert Grint, 3 unknown child actors who were chosen for their roles respectively and made a massive impact in the United States, the market of all markets that everyone wants to crack. It made such a cultural impact upon its release. It kickstarted the movie franchise genre, probably the first of its kind since perhaps the days of Star Wars and Back to the Future. Alongside it came the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and afterwards came the Twilight Saga and also the Hunger Games. The Philosopher's Stone made these kind of sequential follow-on series relevant again. Merchandise sales were astronomical. There was toys, clothing, video games, illustrated versions of the books. It was just an absolute Potter phenomenon that still holds extremely well to this day. In fact, in terms of a cultural impact, there's very few movies that can top The Philosopher's Stone. Now, this movie was directed by the incredible Chris Columbus, one of the best hands-on directors of all time. Chris is an absolute master at work, and it really shows in not just Potter but the movies he's made in the past, like the Home Alone movies, Mrs. Doubtfire, and one of my hidden gems, Bicentennial Man, both of which featured the late great Robin Williams. Now, those last 2 movies I mentioned really come into play in highlighting Chris's overall style. As I said, he's very hands-on, nitty-gritty, wants to see the realism kind of director. Everything in The Philosopher's Stone was real, and by that I mean Chris didn't really like using special computer effects, and for tricks, spells, and even character appearances, he's old school. Everything had to feel real. The Great Hall, for example, was laid out with real long tables, real plates, real cups, towering stone walls. He wanted Hogwarts to appear as if it was a real school, not just a set that was built for the purpose of audience deception. He preferred using puppets and animatronics for most of the creatures like goblins and even Hagrid's body. Even the glow on the ends of the children's wands came from casting lumos were real. Yeah, not CGI at all. They were attached to battery packs under the actors' robes, something Daniel Radcliffe highlighted was very uneasy and uncomfortable to wear. Chris refrained from using CGI whenever possible. You can see the meticulous detail in the costumes. Everything was properly made of the best quality fabrics, as if they were actual real clothes, not just costumes. Richard Harrison even noted just how heavy his robes were when playing Albus Dumbledore, and also very warm. Everything surrounding the wizarding world was built from the ground up to make it all as realistic as possible. Chris wanted the actors to marvel at the set just as much as the audience would. Even the giant wizard's chess set was all constructed from scratch and rigged by a team that moved the pieces back and forth and side to side. The devil's snare was real rubber that was rigged to basically slither around the trio. It's filmmaking that you just don't see anymore, especially in today's day and age. The structure of this movie is very easy to follow, which is not always so simple when you're basically dissecting and shortening a book into 2 hours. You just can't leave everything in. Chris manages to do incredibly well overall. I love the lighting of every scene, how he uses LUT so effectively. It was a warm environment. I can't quite put my finger on it, but The Philosopher's Stone is one of the most realistic movies of the series, probably the most out of them all, due to how practical every scene appears. It's so apparent that Columbus wants to capture the childlike wonder that is the magical world in every scene. He could enjoy himself with this movie because the darker tone that comes into later books didn't exist in The Philosopher's Stone. It was all about Harry's introduction to the wizarding world, which reflects in the complete splendor of each scene. And as I said, the movie is easier to follow, and that's because it has more of a simpler story to it, meaning it runs at a much slower pace. There's more steady camera scenes. It's more relaxed than later fast-paced sequels that go from shot to shot with lots of different angles. CGI is very minimal in this movie, only used when absolutely necessary. As I said, Chris preferred everything to be more practical, more realistic, so when CGI was used, it was used sparingly and effectively. Take the troll for example, a giant magical creature that doesn't really have a real world reference. It slots into the movie perfectly. It's a big scene in terms of the impact on the characters, but doesn't take up a massive part of the movie. Quidditch was something that needed CGI without a doubt. Once again, there's no reference to a real world game that sees people fly around at incredibly fast pace, chasing a little golden ball while trying to avoid larger balls that will actually harm them. So the blend between the actual scenes of Harry participating and the computer effects were blended quite well. But the question is, how did the CGI hold up after 23 years? Well, the answer to that is not so well. I mean, for the time, it was groundbreaking technology. The CGI needed for the Quidditch scenes was actually created by a team solely for that sport, so it was never before seen. But if we compare it to the technology available with CGI today, then yeah, as I said, it does not hold up so well. You can just see how incredibly poor the CGI is here for the Quidditch match. I mean, that girl looks like a video game character. You'd probably get a better quality video game character in today's times. The troll, as I just mentioned, was actually dreadful, and this part here with Harry on his shoulders, it really shows the age of the movie. And let's not forget Firenze. I don't know what the hell that is, but it just looks really poorly animated, but for the time, it was deemed as incredible. As a matter of fact, I'm really surprised that Chris didn't use an actual puppet or an actor in makeup to play Firenze for the close-up shots. The icing on the cake for the terribly aged CGI in The Philosopher's Stone is of course Voldemort himself. This is so bad. Even when I watched it as a kid, I remember thinking, he doesn't look in any way like a real person at all. Voldemort seals the envelope on this movie for its outrageously dated CGI, but overall, you cannot argue the overwhelming fact that Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone does a decent job against the test of time for a film that's almost a quarter of a century old.